And live. It's been a long time, so let's see if this works. Go into my videos. Hope everyone's doing well. There we go. It's working good. Hey, what do you know? So it's been a while. I've been very busy, and I had an immigrant here for a couple months, so I had a roommate for a while, which made it hard to make videos. And as some of you probably know, we just had something of a weather event here, an Arctic blast. A couple records were set. I believe Mount Washington set the wind chill coldest temperature ever for the United States, which I'm not surprised. And I thought I would talk about it because when people talk about the Free State Project, one of the number one reasons people give for not coming is the weather. They say it's too cold. And if there's going to be a day to say that, today is the day. Well, Alexandros, you're going to have to get on something without without a battery. So I just thought it would be a good excuse to kind of get back into things. I'd like to start making videos a little bit more regularly, maybe once a week or every week or two. And I've been well, Jim. How have you been? It's been a long time. Haven't had a haircut, as you can see. But yeah, so I had to work last night, and there were times when I brought a thermometer with me, and it was 18 below, 20 below without wind chill and sustained winds like the entire time. Basically, the entire state was below 20 or 25, counting wind chill. Even without wind chill, everything, everywhere. The most southern part, even the places on the coast. The coast usually is mitigated. It's right by the ocean. The ocean really doesn't freeze this far south. And so as somebody who spends a lot of time traversing the coast, it's very often warm enough that it doesn't snow. You get a lot of rain. And not true. I think even Boston was minus 10, minus 12. Portland, I think, set a record. Port Smith set a record. Bar Harbor set a record. Everyone. You get seasonal depression in snowy places. You just have to find something else to do with your time. I think it's great. I grew up in a snowy place. When I grew up in Michigan, I feel like we had comparable weather to this. Michigan is farther inland, so it's, if anything, colder and hotter. Because places closer to the ocean, the temperature of the oceans tend to moderate the temperatures. Just like within Michigan's a little bit more moderate than if you go even farther inland because of the Great Lakes. But yeah, not a big deal. You dress warm and you'll be fine. You have to be careful with your cars because they might break down. You don't want to get a flat tire. You don't want to be stuck. It really did hurt, like going outside. Anything that was exposed, within a minute you'd get like, if you eat ice cream and you get a headache, it would be like that. And hands would get real cold to the point of like aching and hurting within a minute. And any exposed skin will sting. Wind was so strong it felt like the shoulders. Yeah, wind was consistently blowing for 2 days. That's very unusual. I normally associate really, really cold temperatures with it being still, and that was not the case at all. Very, very heavy winds. I think Mount Washington was getting them over 100 miles an hour. Do you still hypnotize people? I still hypnotize people. Not as much as I was doing maybe 2 years ago at my peak, but I still do it pretty regularly. It's the gray and white everywhere that makes me depressed. I lived in Kansas. Well, Jim, you just live by the coast, and then you can add blue from the ocean and the sky. And there's lots of conifers here too, so there's lots of green. Even in the winter, there's lots of green because there's lots of green trees. There's not that many deciduous trees here. So I've always being somebody from a cold climate, I always thought this was a weird objection. I don't see why it's such a hardship. There's lots of people who have moved here from Florida. And you get to look during the summer, it's hot. We had many days this summer it was over 100. Which was the hottest I've ever seen it here, but 80s, 90s, pretty common, and 70s, pretty common. And then the winter, I mean, this is the coldest that it's ever been since I've been here. But uh, so even getting below zero is kind of like that's considered a cold day. But below freezing is pretty common. But this December has been quite mild. We've had a ton of rain, which I am not accustomed to raining in December. I feel like that should be snow. We've had very little accumulation. I've only shoveled the driveway one time this year, which is absurd. There was a year, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where I had to shovel snow every single day in February. We'll see if that happens, but this is something else. Super super cold. I guess trees were exploding because they were freezing so fast. I'm not down for the cold and the dark. That's why I moved to Texas. Yeah, don't you all have a outage in Texas? And I went to Texas, as Jared knows. I went to a funeral there, and it was cold. It was in the 40s. Like we tried to go swimming, and it was too cold to go swimming. So it's honestly not that much better in Texas. So no, I could never live in Texas. Are you a Bitcoiner? What do you mean by a Bitcoiner? What does that even mean? Moving to New Hampshire is one of my long-term goals. Well, even if for those of you who never want to move here, I definitely suggest that you should visit. I think people should go to PorkFest at least. PorkFest is a lot of fun and it's an interesting event and within view of Mount Washington. So like all these records that are getting set, you can see the place where that happened. Interestingly, when we did PorkFest last year, the day before PorkFest started, it rained and Mount Washington was obscured in clouds. And the next day when the clouds cleared, you could see the entire summit was covered in snow. So even though it was late June, they got snow on, and that's kind of why they're called the White Mountains, is because they'll have snow on them throughout the year. Sometimes it melted within a day, so it wasn't that much accumulation, but yeah, they get snow all year. And thankfully, I haven't lost any power here, but there's been a lot of worry about pipes exploding. Trees have been exploding. Apparently, that's a rare phenomenon, but if they freeze fast enough, and it did freeze very fast. From Thursday, it was relatively warm. Friday, it got cold, and then Friday night, it got very, very cold, and Saturday morning. And it's been, right now, it's about zero, and it feels warm relative to what it's been. But this is a record. I guess it's another reason to make the video, is everyone's saying this is a once-in-a-generation thing. It's never been this cold since I've been here. Everyone else is saying that this is a record book, and it's not that bad. It's perfectly manageable. The society is adapted to that. There are plows, although when it's this cold, you don't really get much snow. When the air temperature is so low, it doesn't hold much humidity or much moisture. And I also think the snow that you did get is from weird, unusual sources. So I guess flash freezing of bodies of water, like on the ocean or some of the bigger lakes or rivers, you get like an icy mist that comes down as snow. It's kind of hard to describe for those of you who are not snow adapted, but there's more than one kind of snow. You might sometimes hear that like Eskimos have 68 or 62 words for snow. Totally understandable, because snow is not all the same. It comes down in different ways, different types, the way it lands, the way it falls, the way it feels, the way it looks. It's all a little bit different. And when it's really, really cold, like it's been the last 2 days, it doesn't snow much, but when it does, it's not very, it's like a very, very light, fluffy stuff. On Thursday night, we got a dusting, and I thought, oh, I might have to plow, and all of it blew away. It was so fine and so not sticky, not heavy or wet, that with the high winds, it just all blew away. It was all gone when I woke up, which was good. But yeah, super windy. People, I'm assuming there's lots of power, lots of pipes and stuff that are getting wrecked, but it hasn't happened where I am. And yeah, you just dress. I mean, it's not that hard you don't need to buy Mount Everest level super expensive stuff. You just layer your clothing and you'll be fine. And I definitely do though wonder if this might have solved the homeless problem in one night, because at that temperature, it's real bad. So yeah, I don't understand. Like if you have I mean, so Obviously, I don't think people are obligated to move to New Hampshire. People aren't obligated to really do anything. I don't believe in positive obligations, but I do kind of wonder if you're really interested in liberty and really interested in things going on, if you are more into the social stuff or the theoretical stuff or the political stuff, that's all kind of happening here. And I feel like it's kind of strange to me when someone's like, I have to have summers. I mean, you still have summers, you just don't have them all year, and you can always go someplace else. I mean, I'm getting awashed in social media posts from New Hampshire people who are in Florida or in St. Kitts or Puerto Rico or wherever else, because that's the glories of the society that we live in today, that you can travel when you need to. Press F for the sauce. Yeah, everyone moved to Texas. Texas is not that great. I lived in Texas. I lived in Texas before it was cool. I had my first oil field job in Texas. I spent time there as a kid. I spent the summer there after sixth grade, and then I moved down there in 2008 for work, and I spent about 2 years on and off in Texas, and yeah, I don't really like it there. It's not my thing, and I got to go back last November for the first time in 13 years, and I still don't want to go there. So I did get to I did get to drive a Tesla when I was there, which was interesting. So I'll probably make a video about why Teslas are dumb, and why we need oil rigs. But yeah, so that's kind of the idea. So like, yeah, I'm looking at probably making videos again, maybe once every week or 2 weeks. There's a couple book reviews I want to do. I want to talk about Ukraine. It's something I haven't talked about too much, but there's a lot to be said about that. And now that I no longer have a roommate, again, I'll be able to do that. So I don't know. How's everyone else been doing? Any questions? The sauce also moved to Texas. I just feel like that's so trendy at this point. You're never going to have political power in Texas, ever. It's too big. There's too much else going on there, and not all of it good. I mean, to the extent that they're anti-liberal, that's fine, but like, they have all the problems that conservatives have. More video cliff notes. You mean book cliff notes or video cliff notes? Yeah, I read, I mean, I can just give you a heads up. The next one is going to be this guy, Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. I read this a couple months ago. And I'll definitely cover that. And yes, an electric car in New Hampshire right now would not even work. If you had a Tesla right now, you would not be able to get it out of your driveway unless you pushed it. Moved to Texas from Seattle. Well, it's a relative thing. John Bragg. Oh my. No, I am not still mudlogging. The last time I did mudlogging work was in 2019. I got offered to go to North Dakota last year, but declined. So that may happen at some point in the future, but I have not actively sought to do it. The mudlogging job was a good job. It was good money. It was nice to travel, but I kind of want to have a life, and mudlogging really didn't allow that. Mudlogging meant you would be in another state for 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, and not just in another state, but working every day, 12 hours a day. The last year and a half that I was doing that, I couldn't even go to the gym. Right. And I would make the best of it. I would bring a bunch of books. Nowadays, I'd probably bring the piano with me because it's electric and I could still be able to practice with that. But it's no good. It's way too much, way too far away. So. Have you ever read Trans by Helen Joyce? No. Or The White Pill? No, I haven't read The White Pill. I like Michael Malice, but I'm not a fan, right? Like, he's fine, but it's just not really my cup of tea. And I've read a few of his books. Dear Reader is quite good, but when I read The New Right, it was fine, but I wasn't like, I've got to read the next one. So I have not read The White Pill, and I don't really have plans. I'm so far behind on all my other books that I don't really want to touch it. And what is Trans about, like transitioning or something else? what are other ones I do want to read? I read one on the outbreak of World War One that I really want to cover too. I think it's called The Sleepwalkers. That's a really good book, and I think really pertinent to the war in Ukraine. I mean, not directly parallel, but comes up with a lot of the same issues. But the Epstein book, I think the Epstein book, for those of you who saw, I did a review of Apocalypse Never by Michael Schellenberger. Epstein's book goes together really well with that, and I'm happy to see that they blurb each other, so they're familiar with each other's work, and they go together really well. There's things about Epstein that I don't like personally. He's kind of comes off as like a Jehovah's Witness or something like that. He has like a smug, superior attitude, and he's very much an objectivist, but he can make a very, very fair argument and be quite intellectually honest. So like his book is actually really, really good. I think most people, anyone who read it honestly, even somebody who was anti fossil fuels, would have a hard time debating him. And I will say too, also, it is one of the most, it's fascinating. So like, obviously anarcho-capitalist, libertarian, I'm a gun owner, right? There's a lot, I never voted for Trump and I've never voted for Republican, but like people perceive me as that. The one thing that will like get people really pissed, the one thing that's led people to like, I'm not going to talk to you, is the fact that when they find out that I worked in oil or work in oil at the time. There's a lot of people who just find that so anathema, the idea that you could, and these are people who drive cars everywhere they go, who fly planes everywhere they go. They have no problem using fossil fuels, including for things that there's no alternative. There is no renewable alternative to air travel. I mean, yeah, there's a solar powered plane, and it takes you like 3 weeks to cross the country, and it can only take one person. So mud logging is the oil related job. The thing that I did in oil is called mud logging. That is my oil job. I do not regret living in New Hampshire. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I don't know why people find this so difficult. In fact, I think it's kind of cool, to subject yourself to really kind of get to experience the elements and the power of nature and whatnot. I think that's pretty awesome. And, you keep seeing Mount Washington in the news. I've climbed Mount Washington several times, not in the winter, not like this, but I have done it. And I think that that's an awesome experience to have. And when you live here, you get to experience that as much as you want, right? I've climbed quite a few of the White Mountains, including Mount Washington. So, and I haven't been up in weather like this, but I've been up in bad weather before, and it's quite awe-inspiring, actually. And the other thing too is like in New Hampshire, you can do Mount Washington, and then later that day you can go to the beach or go to Boston. So it's kind of cool that you have all that within a relatively small area. And Florida, you have hurricanes, you have boa constrictors, you have venomous snakes, you have fire ants and killer bees, like everything. Florida's just awful. Hurricanes, riptides, meth addicts. You can't open carry there unless you're hunting or fishing, which is stupid. So, is DeSantis one of the better governors? Absolutely he is. Is Florida a success story of a state that has become solidly red? Sure. There's lots of nice things about Florida, but one of the things that's not nice about the Florida is the weather. It's way too hot and way too humid. Do you follow the Bishop? Tho Bishop. No, I've heard the name and I've probably seen one or two things, but I don't follow him. Isn't he in the LP? He's like one of the people in the LP. Regardless, I don't follow him and I don't really know anything about him. I've heard Dave Smith mention him, but that's about as far as it goes. I'm not active in LP politics. I really don't follow it. I've never been a member of the LP. I have voted for LP candidates in the past. The only person I ever voted for president was Michael Badnarik when he was the LP's nominee in 2004. But I don't follow contemporary politics. I'm not in the contemporary party. So, yeah. How are they doing? I mean, it seems like the whole thing with the Mises Caucus takeover has kind of been The people who were in favor of it think it's working out fine. The people who were against it think it's been a disaster, and it's like never the twain shall meet. But we have cheap property and affordable living, and last I've heard, New England has horrible OxyContin problems, heroin problems. So, the heroin thing is true. There is a heroin problem in New Hampshire. I had a former roommate who died of a heroin overdose, and I have had two other former roommates who were definitely drug addicts, although not necessarily only for heroin. In fact, I know not only for heroin. So that is true. But I also will say that it doesn't really impact, like the crime is very, very low. So it doesn't translate into murders. It doesn't translate into burglaries or aggravated assaults or anything like that. There's a noticeable homeless population in parts of New Hampshire, definitely in Manchester where I live and in Nashua and a few other places. But the impact it has on you if you're not yourself an addict is quite limited. And I live in like the worst neighborhood in Manchester. The biggest heroin bust in New Hampshire history was like 3 doors down from me. I think they found $1.8 million of heroin. A few years before that, there were 2 drive-by shootings, again, two doors down. My former roommate, when he wanted to get heroin, he left the house and he would come back within 5 minutes with everything that he needed. So like, I live like in the heart of darkness as far as that goes, and it's not that bad. I've never been robbed. I've never had anything broken into. I've never been accosted. I've never felt threatened. It's just, I don't know if it's a cultural thing. I don't know if it's the fact that, guns are so legal here that it's just understood if you go break into people's houses, you could die. I don't know if it's the way the cops act. Like, there's just a lot of things where, yes, it's a problem for society in general. It's not necessarily a problem for you personally. So, and the cheap property, there's more land there. I will say it is relatively expensive here for land, but then there's no sales tax and there's no income tax. What are your views on religion and religious people? Well, I'm not a believer in any religion, but I'm also not anti-religious. I think some of the ethics and some of the philosophy involved is, interesting, and some of it is okay and some of it's not so okay. I tend to think almost all religious people are there not for philosophical reasons or intellectual reasons, but just because of conservative bias. They're in the religion that they were born into, that they were raised in, and they believe in it. They have faith in it without being able to rigorously explain why or defend why or persuade others to do why. And that kind of faith or religiosity is not super compelling to me. Now, there are people who aren't like that, who do have experiences or have come to it for more philosophical reasons, and that's all fascinating. But no, I'm not anti-religious. I'm not one of those people who wants to wage a culture war against religious people. And to the extent that I don't like the government, and to the extent that faith communities provide an alternative authority that for some people anyway is a higher authority than the state, I actually welcome them. So a lot of churches do a lot of good. A lot of churches do a lot of bad. And you can kind of try and do a qualitative or quantitative analysis about which ones are better or worse. But that's how I feel about it. RIP and RIP your friends. Well, some of them were friends, but they were roommates. But, I've been in the position of trying to help drug addicts a couple times, bringing them to therapy, bringing them to rehab, taking them in. I've taken people in off the street before, for extended periods. And you can really, really try and help people, but it's difficult in that situation. And it's hard to help them if they can't help themselves. And you can get into debate about, is it really their fault? Is it a disease? Is it the accumulation of all their circumstances? And you can be really judgy about it. You can be not judgy about it. But regardless, it can be a really, really bad situation. And there comes to a point where you have to acknowledge you can't help them. And this happened with people I was close to and also people I'm not close to. I've had I have a friend in my jiu-jitsu class who had a son who was a heroin addict. And, he at one point kicked his son out and said, "You're gone." This guy told me, he's like, "Dude, you cannot help an addict, and you just have to kick him out." And this is a guy referring to his own son. So like, yeah, I mean, I've even, I one time hypnotized a guy to quit meth, and apparently it worked. But then he asked me to hypnotize him to forget his wife. And I said, I don't ethically feel okay with that. So I didn't do it. But, yeah, I don't know that the problem is worse here than in other places. It certainly doesn't come with the same crime that you associate with drug use in a lot of other places, right? So you're not having a lot. I just described several violent acts, right? There was a drive-by, there was a cop who was shot, there have been murders, but the overall murder rate is extremely low. It's the lowest of all the 50 states. It's lower than pretty much anywhere in Europe other than, say, like Iceland, but it's lower than the UK. Even the official UK standards statistics, which are way underreported. I think, you look at one of the early videos I did comparing US and UK gun control, the UK vastly underreports their homicides. The way that they count them is so different that a lot of homicides happen that they don't count. Because in the UK, it only counts as a homicide if there's a conviction for homicide. Right? So if they find a person who's got 3 gunshot wounds in his chest and they're laying there dead, that does not count as a homicide until they have captured somebody, charged them, and convicted them of homicide. But even their highly ridiculously made up homicide rate is higher than the homicide rate in New Hampshire. It's a very low homicide rate. And yeah, there's homeless people around. You see them panhandling in places. There's homeless encampments that seem to move around. I kind of wondering what's happening to them right now, because anyone in a homeless encampment last night is probably dead, or horribly frostbitten at least. I mean, it was no joke. Like, even fully clothed, even my apartment is cold right now, right? I'm gonna put the heat so high, but personally, how much is it going to affect you? I would say it's minimal. So I live right in the heart of it, and it's minimal for me. Now, if I was a heroin addict, that would be different. So don't be a heroin addict, and you won't have that problem. Are there any old former ANCAP YouTubers you keep up with, and are there any new bloods you've been watching? So keep up with? No. And I'll be honest, like in my perspective, the old ANCAP YouTubers were pretty much done before I even started making videos. I started making videos, is it February? Yeah, it's February. So I started making videos in February of 2011, so 12 years ago now. And by the time I started doing that, a lot of these guys had already had their whole thing. So Liberty is Not Given, ex-Omniverse. There was a guy called Austro-Libertarian. But many, Nilcio, the original versions of Stefan Molyneux and who I always think of as Confedero-Socialist, but now I guess he goes by Alternative Hypothesis. Brain Police, just tons and tons. I mean, I'm almost hesitant to start naming them because I'll forget some. Tumbleweed Joe is one who just recently, or maybe about a year ago, he uploaded a video saying it's been 11 years since he did a video. But I don't personally stay in contact with any of these guys. Some of them I'm friends with some of them on like Facebook or whatever, but I don't talk and be like, hey, how's it going? And I mean, at this point, I mean, some of them could be dead. Some of them could be married. They could have kids. They could have families. They could have really moved on. I know a lot of them just got tired of making the same videos, right? Making the same arguments over and over and over again. You know, it just gets intellectually boring. They may have moved on philosophically. You know, some of those guys have been all over the map since then, you know, which you could see is a virtue, or you could see that as a vice. I don't know. Like, but no, I haven't really followed and if there's any new ones, I mean, we both know Drew Hancock. That's about the only one that I really fall in that category. Like, it's just changed a lot. You know, the whole thing of doing a vlog, like the stuff that gets the most views isn't that. You know, you want to have something edited that's put together and that's, you know, snippy. And a lot of people kind of made their a lot of people made their mark by like interviewing a ton of people, because there's a lot of libertarians who will make themselves available. Like if you message David Friedman and you're like, hey, I want to interview you, he'll probably make the time. He's not going to say, oh, you got to pay me or whatever. A lot of guys who are like that. So there's been a lot of people who have just become interviewers, and then they kind of indirectly get, I don't want to say famous, libertarian celebritarian as a result. And I guess maybe there's a little bit of contempt coming through my voice when I say that. And maybe it's not deserved, but like, yeah, I think people just move on, and then YouTube just changed. But in the early days you could do the reply videos, and I thought that was great. And there were all these, I'm talking back, like I was still in college. So this is 2008 and before, 2006, 2007, 2008. Like you would make a video and like, can property be theft or not? And then you get a reply, and other people would come in and like, those were interesting. I think we were working under a 14-minute time limit on videos, and I think there also was like a 500-character limit on comments. But you had like, it seemed like a lot of genuine dialogue going on. You had a lot of genuine, here's what I think. But the people who were libertarians back then were on average very different than they are now. The Ron Paul revolution, I think, really was a revolution in terms of who's a libertarian and who's not. It was a tremendously good thing. I'm not criticizing it in that way, but it brought in a lot of people, and they were a different type of person. The pre-Ron Paul libertarians were, much better read. They'd read a lot more. They hadn't become libertarians because of a popular movement. They'd become libertarians because they had read widely and deeply, and probably gone through a couple stages where maybe they were conservative, maybe they were objectivist. Objectivism was a very common way station for a lot of these guys, ex-Omniverse in particular, but Aaron 1883 was one that also fell into that category. Eventually they kind of settled, like this is to them the most persuasive or convincing thing. And then you get Ron Paul. Also, I would have put someone in here like Stefan Molyneux, who probably deserves credit or repute, depending on how you look at it, because he was somebody who had the ability, and I'll say this is a great ability, to make a video and to present it in a way that a normie could find that persuasive, right? A lot of people who hadn't read a lot necessarily. I'm not saying that every Steph bot is illiterate or whatever, but a lot of them are. I mean, I had this distinct experience at PorcFest one of the years he was there, which I think is when I first started making anti-Stefan Molyneux videos. I think if you go back, the first Stefan Molyneux video I made, I'm sitting in my truck in a forest. It was right after PorcFest. But I had met some of his followers there. They were all wearing, and they were wearing Free Domain t-shirts, all of them, the same matching t-shirts. So if you wanted to broadcast that you're in a cult, like, best way to do it, right? And one of them told me that he was the greatest philosopher who ever lived, which is something he explicitly has claimed many times. And I said, name one other philosopher whose book you've read. And they couldn't name one. Now, I'm not the most philosophically trained person in the world, and I'll admit, I have, those books behind me, how am I point? 2 of those shelves are philosophy, only 2, okay? And I've only read some of them, okay? But to have someone say that so-and-so is the greatest philosopher ever, and they've never read another philosopher, right? You've got to think, right? His ability to persuade somebody to believe something like that. And so you got a lot of people who they didn't read a ton. They don't know a lot of history. They don't know a lot of philosophy. They don't know Rothbard or Mises or Friedman or Michael Huemer or the Tannenhills or any of that stuff. That's all stuff they've never heard of, but they're an anarcho-capitalist now. And like part of me, that in some ways that's great, but then that's a different type of person than somebody who spent 10 years going through stuff as systematically as they could and thoughtfully as they could and slowly. And so like the intellectual quality, the intellectual heft that an individual libertarian or anarcho-capitalist especially had in 2000, say 6 or 7, was way higher than it is now. Now, some of those people do go and become very well read. There are definitely like noobs, they would say, who get really into it and they go and they do a lot of research and they do end up catching up and becoming formidable, intellects who know a lot. But a lot of them don't. A lot of them, like, they just come to it and, like, that's fine. I was always shocked too, like, going to PorcFest. Like, if you go to PorcFest, which all of you should go to PorcFest, even if you're not going to move to New Hampshire. PorcFest is in June. It's not going to be negative 25, 35 degrees then, unless you go on Mount Washington, and maybe it will be, but probably not. And I always imagine, like, hey, if someone's going to actually come to PorcFest, or they're going to move to New Hampshire, they're going to be a Rothbardian, they're going to read every single book that I have, and blah, blah, blah. And, like, you will find people where that's true. But you'll also find people who are just like, I hate the government, or I want weed to be legal, I mean, and really you get like the hippies, like, I just want weed to be legal and I want to do my own thing, man, and blah, blah, blah. And then you have, like, I'm a gun owner, I'm ex-military, I want to fucking kill the communists, whatever. And, like, they all come together and it's a beautiful thing. But it's really changed a lot. The dynamic has changed a lot. Like, I think that libertarianism up until like 2007, 2008 was one thing, and then it just has changed a lot. It's become bigger. There's more people. There's a whole media space now that there wasn't before, right? I mean, yeah, Fee had a newsletter, and Mises Institute has been having its thing since the 80s, and Cato has existed, and Reasons existed. But now there's an entire media ecosystem, which is wonderful. There's a huge amount of content. And even if I don't like all of it or most of it, a lot of it is good. And even the stuff I don't like is maybe effective. So, like, but that it's become a bit of a mass media thing, and so you get a mass appeal and you get people in there that maybe you didn't get before, for good or for ill. The lack of crime there is interesting. The only reason I know about it, the heroin issue, is because I know someone from Connecticut who moves down to Florida and used to talk about it. Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know if it's a prescription drug thing or not, or what. I think I've told this story before. I had a sauna buddy who was a local, and he was in his early 20s, but he was overcoming prescription drug addiction. He said growing up, he grew up in a very affluent suburb called Bedford. Bedford's like the rich town around Manchester. And property taxes there are very, very high. So to live in Bedford, you kind of have to have a certain amount of money. And he said that, he started taking Xanax and other things from his mom when he was like 16, 17. And, he had to do the whole thing where he's going on to methadone. And the whole reason he did the sauna is because he thought it helped him. It gave him a high, which I've never gotten high in a sauna, but I've heard other people say that it can. And yeah, so like it was very much highly medicated. Prescription drugs are filtering down to other people. But, I look at like a homeless guy in one of the encampments in Manchester. I kind of doubt that's what happened with them. I don't know. It's so cold here, they're not going to really get drawn. But yeah, another thing, alcohol. I mean, alcohol is a bitch, man. Alcohol can ruin people's lives, and it can be more expensive than doing heroin or doing some of these other drugs, right? You need more to get less, and so people end up transitioning to that as well, And I don't talk about this a ton, but I'm a teetotaler. I don't even drink tea, but like I've never had a drink of alcohol in my life, and I tend to think that's advisable. I think people should do that. Whatever happened to Fringe Elements and Junior Bacon Cheese? So I am a fan of Junior Bacon Cheese. I loved his content. He actually did a short-lived thing back in like 2010, 2011, where he would like do comedy, or he'd like watch news stories and they'd like drink and they'd make libertarian comments that were pretty funny. Fringe Elements has been all over the map, and like he's still a fascinating guy, but like he became a Confederate. So I mean, he changed it. When I first knew him, his name was Stuttles, and then Confederate Socialist, and Wisdom of the Squirrel, and he became an ANCAP, and then he became not an ANCAP, and then he became a race realist, and then this idea that it was because feudal Europeans were executing violent members of their society, and so they downregulated for aggression and became like more communal or whatever, and that's why white people are better than the whole thing. The whole race realism thing, also such a weird thing that it became a divergent for a decent number of anarcho-capitalists and libertarians became quote-unquote race realists. Somehow the IQ gap made them believe that all the arguments against the state somehow no longer had force, right? Never made sense to me. Even accepting the IQ gap and that there's genetic differences between different groups, which I find like non-controversial, to the implication that, well, we need a state then. No, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, among other things. So yeah, he's been all over the map. Some of his content is still good. I still watch some of his videos and I find them fascinating some of the time. Like, he's just been all over the map. Alternative hypothesis. X-Omniverse really took a turn for the worse. The LP ruined his head. How did the LP ruin his head? And when did that happen? Are we talking about 10 years ago, or are we talking like this year? I can't think of any newer ANCAPs. Maybe Love, Life, and Anarchy. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's different. It's just different. And I think the media space has become dominated by, it promotes and caters to people who want to get views and get clicks. And that's, to get that is a skill. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, Mr. Beast is a genius at getting views on YouTube, but like, what do I care about the videos he makes? I don't care at all about it. It's not even, it's a testament to like his skill at gaming the algorithm. Great. But like, why should I spend my time, looking into that? I don't. So yeah, there's a ton of these guys who make content, and like, I don't care about most of it. There's some like, Shane Killian, that's one who's still around. I don't really watch his stuff anymore, but like, it's fine. He's kind of consistently been there from more or less the beginning. So yeah, I mean, and a lot of them, like, I'm gonna have a podcast. And so I'm gonna have a podcast and I'm gonna interview everybody, and it's who's on Twitter, which, like, I am on Twitter, but I got onto Twitter to follow the war in Ukraine, and I've made like 6 tweets. I'm not trying to become a Twitter person. I joined it after Elon took over, and because I wanted to get the most up to date stuff I could about the war in Ukraine. But I'm not like an active Twitter warrior, but a lot of people are there, and a lot of it is centered there. So. Hey Ron, nice to see you again, and I am staying warm. I put on an extra blanket, so I'll be fine. Molyneux went full fash. Yeah, Molyneux, I mean, I remember him saying you can't support Ron Paul. He made a whole essay called My Father, Ron Paul, My Father, a Klan reformer, how saying you can't reform the Klan, the Klan's irredeemable, and you can't reform it, and therefore you shouldn't give money to Ron Paul. And he'd have these roundtable discussions about how the Ron Paul campaign was bad for the liberty movement because people were donating to Ron Paul instead of donating to Stefan Molyneux, right? Or other, things. So it's kind of an interesting point there. But then all of a sudden he's like, you got to vote for Trump, and Mexicans aren't really humans. They're a different species, and apologizing to Christians. And that was another, he was such a sycophant when, like, Christianity is stupid. If you believe in it, you're horrible and you're evil and blah, blah, blah. And then he'd interview Tom Woods and he'd just fawn over him the whole time. And it's like, you're not going to call him out for being a Catholic? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. As much as I'm a critic of Molyneux, I think he's a mixed bag. Yeah, look, I'll give the guy credit. He is definitely a mixed bag. He has made some beautiful, amazing stuff. His ability to connect with people is a true skill. I don't think that he's an intellectual powerhouse in terms of like an original philosopher. His original philosophy, as Jim, I know you very well know, is all stupid and horrible. But like, the ability to get on a camera and convince somebody to become an anarcho-capitalist is not easy. I've probably done it to dozens or maybe hundreds of people. He's done it to tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people. That's amazing. Very, very few people can do that. Ron Paul could kind of do that, and he had the whole thing of being a congressman and everything in a much longer life. Ayn Rand didn't make people anarcho-capitalists, but she did have the ability through her writings to persuade people to radically change their positions. Very, very few people can do that. It is a skill. Now, he also comes across as a creepy cult leader, and I think not so subtly aspires to that, but that is a true skill. And even though I don't think he's a great originator of ideas, I'm not a great originator of ideas. A couple of times I thought I had an original idea, and then I found it in a Rothbard book later, or a Tannenhill book, right? And to be somebody, a secondhand dealer in ideas, is not easy and still requires a lot of intelligence, and he has all of those things. But he just can't get over himself. And when he started to get more popularity by appealing to a non-libertarian crowd, and I've said this before, other people have noted it too. If you have been following Molyneux a long time, he made that Trayvon Martin video, and that got a ton of conservative attention. And I think that was like 2013. And he just kind of deviated from. Now, do I think he should have been canceled and white supremacized? And, no, I don't think any of that. No. Molyneux brought me to becoming an ANCAP as an early teen. I've been to Mises U twice since then and became well-read. That said, I've never interacted with the rest of the Steph bots, so I doubt many became well-read. Yeah, most of them don't. He kind of presents it like I'm the answer to everything, and he's not like, here's all the books you should read. These are the other thinkers you should follow. In fact, to the extent he kind of, this was my very first alarm bell with him, was way back in 2008 or 2009, where he was answering questions, and somebody asked him about how do you handle defense without a state. And he goes, well, I came up with this thing. That's what he said. I came up with this thing called DROs, dispute resolution organizations. And he describes them, and I'm like, yeah, those are just insurance companies. You have those. Hans Hermann Hoppe talked about them in Democracy of the God That Failed and The Myth of National Defense. And the Tannenhills talked about them in The Market for Liberty back in the 70s. And fucking Gustave de Molinari wrote a famous article called The Private Production of Defense in the 1870s. And I thought, either Molyneux knows about all those things and now he's just copying the idea and pretending it's his idea, or he doesn't know about all those things, in which case he's not really that well read. And I actually don't know which one it is. It's one or the other. There's no third category. And that was kind of my first, something's up with him. Anyone else feeling called out? The whole gang is here. The whole race realism thing. I don't know, it is interesting. Part of it is that the left is so toxic about talking about. They cannot talk about it. They cannot have an intellectually honest discussion about IQ. And so people are like, well, I hate the left, and so therefore I want to bite into this. And so they did, and that just makes you feel like you're going into the forbidden area, and you've got this forbidden knowledge, and it seems like this look, genetics is very powerful. Genetics is super important. It's really hard to underestimate or to overestimate how powerful it is. And so then it kind of gives you the sense I can kind of understand everything now because I know this. Right? I can just look through the lens of IQ and say this explains every statistic when it comes to, say, crime, right? But I think that's taking it a little too far. Wait, so it sounds like there's people going here who are not not using their old names. Shane is a crazy person now. Why is that? Why has everyone gone crazy? Just, you guys have gone crazy because you have not moved to New Hampshire yet. You would be sane still. Any opinion on Musk? Mixed opinion on Musk. I think he's kind of a shameless rent seeker when it comes to the government, and I think that the whole Tesla thing is totally overblown. I got the chance to drive a Tesla, and I think that they're so inferior to internal combustion engines that it's just absurd. So, is it good that he's more free speech oriented on Twitter, although he's petty about people making fun of him? Yeah, that's good. Do you prefer metals or crypto? Short-term metals, long-term crypto. Be right back. His real-time relation is going to cut off my entire extended family. Yeah, what is he even, is this, I mean, now that he's been kicked off YouTube, which again, I don't support, he should still be on YouTube. All of that was bullshit. I'll be one of those people. And other people have been like this too. Like, I disagree, but he shouldn't have been silenced the way that he was. But does he still talk about all that? Is that still his thing? Defooing is probably the single worst thing he ever promoted. Yeah, and then he lied about his wife getting censored for that to Joe Rogan's face. And so there's just a video of him lying about it. So he was so petty he couldn't be honest with facts. Let's not make the whole stream about Molyneux. Well, people keep asking. The only time I ever heard Molyneux ever mention Rothbard was to criticize his view on parental obligations. Yeah, I'm also a little bit triggered too, because there was one where he was comparing himself favorably to everybody else. I'm better than Mises and Rand and Roth. If you go way back, there's videos of him saying, if I've seen far, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of chain-smoking Russian female giants, right? So he's a slight nod to Ayn Rand, but he's just... who has talked about spanking? Me, not Rothbard. And then he's like, who has talked about circumcision? Me, not Rothbard. I'm like, hello. But anyway, yeah, he wants to compare himself favorably to everybody else. And that's just petty. Even if in certain situations he might be right. But yeah, he's a mixed bag. I think he's a very intelligent guy, but his overwhelming desire and need to be seen as the smartest guy in the world and to achieve that kind of it really hurt him, right? I mean, unnecessary too. He's made a lot of great content. He's a great contributor. He is a smart guy. I would never deny that, even if UPB is completely wrong. I mean, if I tried to write a UPB, it would be completely wrong too. So like, I'm not right. Like, but he obviously has some serious personal issues, which we all do, but it's kind of really negatively impacted his public contributions, and made him in some sense like an extremely petty, narcissistic misogynist. And I wouldn't throw that term around. It gets thrown around way too much. But like the fact, the stuff he says about his mom, the stuff he says about Galadriel, right? He fucking hates Galadriel. How can you hate Galadriel? That's when I knew I had to jump the shark from that. That was like 2014. He said he never read Rothbard. Let's move off Molyneux to a more creepy topic, or cheery topic like abortion. Yeah, everyone loves infanticide. Is Molyneux pro or anti-abortion? I also thought that he's kind of like the evil opposite of Joseph Marola. You have Jacques Fresco, and who was the other one? Marola? I felt like he was like Marola. That when they would debate each other, it was kind of like they are like evil twins, kind of. New Hampshire is too cold. Come on, people. It's not that cold. Is it weird that I got into libertarianism through Milton Friedman? I'd say that's pretty unusual nowadays, but how exactly? Did you read one of his books, or did you see like Free to Choose or Commanding Heights? My introduction to Milton Friedman was the PBS documentary Commanding Heights, which by and large is a good documentary. I think it was made in the 90s. Too many bears. Yeah, they took over a whole town. Has your opinion on Ukraine changed as of late? I was listening to Colonel McGregor and Napolitano on the subject before this stream. Changed from what? I have to say that the war in Ukraine, like, on paper, a lot. I want to do a whole video on this, but like, there's a lot about my intuitions that would make me seem more like a Douglas McGregor. For instance, I don't think that NATO should exist, or if NATO does exist, the United States doesn't need to be a member of NATO. I don't think the United States should have been involved in World War I. I don't think the United States needed to be involved in World War II. I'm the whole Pearl Harbor was not an inside job, but like they pushed Japan, blah, blah, blah. I'll go in that. The whole idea that the Soviet Union is this incredibly powerful state that we need to like upend our society to fight, I think was wrong. Yes, the Soviet Union was as evil or more evil than people think. But the solution to that was not to create a totalitarian empire here. I think it was William F. Buckley who was like, we need to create a totalitarian state in the United States to fight that totalitarian state. And then once it collapses, we'll give it up. And of course, that didn't happen. You have this tiny group of paleo-libertarians like Pat Buchanan and Russell Kirk, who after the Cold War were like, yes, now let's have our peace dividend and give up the empire. And that didn't happen, right? It didn't even come close to happening. So like, I am very, very sympathetic to that. And I also realize that, like, let's say tomorrow, all of Ukraine and all of the former Soviet states were just magically absorbed into Russia, that the United States will still not be in any danger. Russia today is so pathetically weak relative to what the USSR was. Its population is straight up half what the USSR's was. USSR in 1990 had 280 million people. Russia has 140 million people. 1 million people left because of the war. Tens or hundreds of thousands are going to die because of the war already, if not longer. And their economy is completely destroyed. So, like, there's that. But I think, and look, Scott Horton is a hero of mine, and I love reading his books, and Scott Horton is married to a Ukrainian and blah, blah, blah. But, like, I think they get to this point, and I'll say this to Scott. I was thinking about this the other day. Scott will blame everything on America. So, like, they look at it like everyone in Ukraine is fine with Russia, and it's only because Victoria Nuland and the coup in 2014, which they think is all the CIA, and there was nobody in Ukraine who was in favor of that, and everything is America's fault, and everything is NATO's fault. And, like, I actually don't believe that Russia is attacking Ukraine because of NATO. I think the war is making NATO much, much stronger and Russia much, much weaker. And I don't believe that's why Russia has invaded Ukraine. As much as I'm a critic of NATO, as much as I'm a critic of there even being a NATO, and like NATO would still work without the United States. All those European countries together are richer and stronger. You got 2 countries with nuclear weapons. You've got 5 or 6 more who could have nuclear weapons within a year if they wanted. And people don't realize this. Sweden was 6 months away from a nuclear weapon in the 1960s. Right? So Germany could have them. Italy could have them. Spain could have them. Poland could have them. Sweden could have them. Finland could have them. Norway could have them. All these states could have nuclear weapons. And it only takes a couple for them to be basically uninvadable. All right? But, like, so I think Putin, I don't even think of Putin as like an evil dictator. I think of him as a benevolent dictator. I think of him as somebody, and I don't mean that because he's actually benevolent. I think that in his head, he's doing what he thinks is best for quote unquote Russia. And that doesn't make it okay. That makes it even worse in a lot of ways. But I think that they honestly believe, and I listen to Russians with Attitude, which are they're for the war and they're Russians, right? So I'm getting a lot of perspective from them and from the bits I watch on Russian television. They really seem to believe that Ukrainians and Russians are a fraternal people, that they're one group, and that somehow gives them the right to annex the state as much as they can. It looks like they probably wanted to take the whole thing at the beginning, and there was some major miscalculations made about how much the Ukrainians were going to be okay with that. Turns out that most of them are not. And look, the Ukrainians have great propaganda. They have the best press I've ever seen in the West, and there's so many flaws with them. I'm not going to cover them all now, but I'm totally aware of the corruption, the venality. I think Ivan the Heathen made some fantastic videos on this. If those of you who haven't seen him, look up Ivan the Heathen's channels. Look his coverage on the Ukraine war. There's compelling evidence that Zelensky actually wanted to surrender, and the military in Ukraine said, no, you can't. Said, it's your head if you surrender. Like, I don't know if that's true, but it might be true. But, I think one thing that Ivan said that I agree with is if we want to have anarcho-capitalism, we want to get rid of the states. There's 3 states in the world that are the ones that need to go the most, and those are the United States, Russia, and China. Those are the 3 biggest, most powerful states. And there's a non-trivial chance now that Russia is going to commit suicide in this war. I'm not saying that's going to happen. There's other alternatives that could happen as well, and I wouldn't want to lay odds. but Russia has fallen apart several times in the past from wars. This war, just to be a little bit spurgy on the thing, the Soviet Union fought a 10-year war in Afghanistan. It lost about 10,000, 12,000 people in 10 years. Russia's lost at least double that number in 1 year. So that's 20 times the casualty rate in 1 year, but the population is only half as much, so it's like 40 times as bad. And also in the Afghanistan war, they didn't lose any capital ships or planes or anything. So like Russia could fall apart as a result of this, and I think that would be a good thing. Now, does that mean the United States should support the war? No, I can't make a rational justification for that. I can't, so I'm not going to. And I'm way behind now. But so like Scott Horton, I heard him, he was talking about China, and he made it sound like, he goes, the reason China is bad is because the Democrats in the United States have all this anti-China policy. Like they talk about we got to pivot to China and pivot to Asia and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's insane. China is actually an evil communist dictatorship. And regardless of what, PNAC or the Foundation for Democracy or these other neoliberal, horrible U.S. hegemony think tanks in Washington, D.C. do or say, and I hate all of them and I hate all their plans and I think they're stupid and I think they're evil and blah, blah, blah. It's just asinine to me to blame China on them. And it's equally asinine to say, like, all the stuff Russia's doing is just to defend themselves against NATO, and that they're the aggrieved party and it's all America's fault. That's not true. I get hating the federal government, but that doesn't mean that other governments aren't bad, as bad or worse, depending on how the metric. Russia is a horrible state. It's not as horrible as the Soviet Union was. It's probably not as horrible as the CCP is or might be or has been, but it's a horrible state. And what it's doing in Ukraine is disgusting on every level. And kind of a joke when you try and break it down, like, oh, they're a fraternal people. Like, well, all the ethnic minorities in Russia, like the Buryats and the Tuvans, they're not fraternal people, and yet the Russians say, and this whole thing where like they get all indignant that, oh, Donbass seceded from the Ukraine. Yeah, you can't secede from Russia. I'm old enough to remember when Chechnya tried to secede from Russia. We all know what they did then. It's and one of the anti-Russian or Russian expat bloggers, a guy named Zach the Russian, talks about, he read the Russian Constitution, and the Russian Constitution says you can never leave Russia no matter what. And then here they all say, oh, Lugansk, Donetsk, they don't believe in secession, so they're hypocrites. They absolutely don't believe in secession, so they're complete hypocrites. And the secession in those territories was completely run by Russia anyway. So, yeah. I got into libertarianism through Hayek. Yeah, Hayek's great, but he's not an ANCAP. Shane went crazy because of a tragic car accident. That's sad. Hope it didn't involve his daughters. Road to Serfdom is terrible. Yeah, what an overrated book. And he was knighted by the Queen, so we really know he's a spy. More Molyneux. Peter Joseph Merola, that's him. Yeah. Tim Pool. Yeah, I've heard this about Tim Pool being a narcissist. If he is, he definitely covers it a lot better than Stefan Molyneux does. Ryan Dawson correctly points out that people like Scott Horton, and I am a Ryan Dawson fan. I think Ryan Dawson's great. I don't agree with him on everything, but I think he's very intellectually honest, and I enjoy listening to him on Odyssey whenever I can. Scott Horton seems to be more anti-American than the entire Principality. Yeah, I think that's true, and I am a huge Scott Horton fan. His books are amazing. Enough Already and Fool's Errand are both incredible books, and he, unlike say Molyneux, will recommend people read books, and I've profited immensely. He's given me more better book recommendations than anybody else, including about stuff about the war. I did that book, the review on the book The Threat. That book was the book is older than I am, but like it it really helped me understand the war in Ukraine in some ways a lot better. Like, but I do think that's correct, that everything is the fault of the federal government, right? Russia's invading Ukraine because of NATO and because of the Victoria Nuland phone call about the coup. And look, yes, the CIA is involved, and fuck the CIA. CIA shouldn't exist, and they're criminals, and blah blah blah. But there are millions of people in Ukraine, many millions. I'm not going to say what percent, because I know it's not everybody, but many millions of people in Ukraine who hate Russia and will fight to the death fighting Russia. This is to juxtapose with, say, Afghanistan, right? We paid a lot of money for an army in Afghanistan, and it didn't do anything, right? It fell apart in less than a day. Before we even left, it fell apart. Ukraine's not the same. There's millions of people in Ukraine, just like there's millions of people in Eastern, and this should be telling. All the neighbors of the Russians hate them. Why do you think the Poles and the Estonians and the Latvians and the Lithuanians and the Finns and the Czechs and the Slovaks and the Bulgarians and the Romanians fucking hate the Russians? Why do you think that is? Is that Russophobia spread by DC? Is that all because of Washington's evil manipulations that they hate Russia so much? No, it's not. Yes, DC is full of criminals. Yes, the foreign policy that they're horrible war criminals. You know what's weird too, though? Stephen Kotkin has this saying that Russia's goals or its desires far outstrip its grasp. Its conception of itself is that it's the most important central power in the world, that it should be the most powerful, that it has this connection, this really mythological connection to Rome. They consider themselves the third Rome. You have Rome, which is the first Rome, and then Constantinople, the second Rome, and then Moscow, right? And there's this convoluted line that the niece of the last Byzantine emperor married, one of the Ruriks, Ivan IV or whatever, and voila, Russia has this magical place. And the thing is, Russia is a second-rate poor country. It's a gas station, right? It's got a lot of nukes. That's true, that it stole from the United States. And when it had this ideology of communism, as bad as communism was, it was an ideology that did actually motivate people and gave them great press in the West. But modern Russia doesn't have that. Modern Russia is kind of anti-ideological, but they want what the United States has. The United States is the richest, most powerful country in the world, and they wish that they had that. And they look at it like, well, if you can invade Iraq, we should be able to do that. Yeah, everyone in the U.S. government who is responsible for the war in Iraq should be, prosecuted as a war criminal and put to death or put in prison and then rot in hell, right? It's kind of funny, when the invasion happened, there's interviews of David Petraeus. And the reporter goes, well, as somebody who invaded a sovereign country, what do you think about Russia? How's Russia's doing it? Right? And even fucking George Bush gave a speech condemning the war in Ukraine. And he's like, Vladimir Putin is committing a horrible, unjustified criminal war of a sovereign country in Iraq. And he goes, oh, well, Ukraine. But so you can see like that's a Freudian slip. And then he goes, but Iraq also. So he's admitting that he's a war. Anyway, Russia looks like we want to do that. We want to be like that. They showed us what, but that's still their, like, so I think Scott Horton blames way too much. Now, the other part of it is he's worried about nuclear Armageddon, which is very understandable. But I don't know where he draws the line of like, how far can you push the nuclear blackmail? Because if you take it logically far enough, you should just submit to nuclear blackmail all the time, right? You should, if someone has a nuclear power, you should just do whatever they want, because anything else could escalate to nuclear weapons or nuclear war, right? So I haven't seen him work that out in his head or verbally. Maybe he has someplace else, but yeah. I got into a shouting match with Scott Horton at a party about Israel because I said I don't think that the powerful party in a fight is evil by necessity. Well, I would agree with you on that, but Israel is still, I don't like Israel. Israel does a lot of stupid shit, and they're quite mendacious about it. Regarding what you said about eliminating three big states, I agree. It would be awesome, but if Russia would fall apart, would make Americans more aggressive internationally. There'd be that's a fair point. I don't know though if there's the domestic stomach for that in the United States, and it's like people kind of got tired with the Cold War as it was, and if Russia falls apart, there's just that many more reasons, and like people will try and do the pivot to China. There's so many reasons that I don't think we should fear China. I mean, I hate the Communist Party. The communists are evil. They're a terrible state. They're surrounded by states that hate them, and they're super vulnerable, and their demographics are abysmal. They've never escaped the middle income trap. There's a lot of problems with China, and there's a lot of conservatives in the United States who are not good libertarians and don't know economics. And so when China says, we have a 5-year plan to have the best military in the world, they just believe that because they don't know enough about economics and know that's false. And China's been having 5-year plans, for 50 years, and they're still 50 years behind us. And they're losing a couple million people a year. Their population's been going down now for about a decade. My favorite Ryan Dawson clip is when he blames literally every problem in the world. Yeah, there's one where he specifically doesn't. I'm sure that's a joke, but like he talks about like if his coffee's cold, it's because a Jew came and cool it off. Yeah. And Ryan Dawson was kicked off social media way before it was cool, years and years and years ago. So, the obsession with nuclear war with Horton makes him as kooky as Alex Jones to me. Well, I wouldn't say that. I think, and I'm not a critic of Jones, but he's way more kooky than Scott Horton is. Russia is terrified of the U.S. and they'd never use nuclear weapons because of it. I think that's probably right. And I don't want to tempt fate there, and I cannot make an argument that the United States should support Ukraine, so I won't. I mean, if you want to voluntarily support, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But, like, I can't make an argument that Americans should be taxed. The whole idea of national interest is a problematic one and can be abused. It's so open to subjective things and whatnot. And I could just say, even if tomorrow all of Ukraine became part of Russia, we would all be safe. That would not be a problem. The Soviet Union as it existed was far bigger and far more powerful than even a Russia plus Ukraine and Belarus. Let's throw Belarus in there too. Of course, that's not going to happen. This war is one of the angles I would put on this is this war is likely going to create a stronger sense of Ukrainian identity and nationhood than anything that's ever happened to Ukraine. That's even if the Russians win, right? Even if somehow, these mobilizations happen and the Russians somehow, get all the way to the Dnieper or even all of Ukraine, there have been enough glorious victories on the part of the Ukrainians, as they'll remember them anyway, whether they were or not. We could quibble, but like that's how they're going to be remembered. They're going to remember the Moskva sinking. They're going to remember Snake Island coming back. They're going to remember the retreat from Kyiv. They're going to remember the Kharkiv and the Kherson offensives. Even if they have no more victories in the course of this war, that's enough to build a national identity on, unfortunately. Whether I think that makes sense or not, I think that's the case. And there's just going to be a lot of personal hatred and animosity towards Russia that no amount of changing the textbooks in a post-Russian victory is going to change. And now Finland and Sweden are joining NATO, and all the NATO countries are increasing their defense spending. And meanwhile, Russia's losing, millions of dollars of equipment, billions of dollars on net, month by month by month, and not to mention hundreds of thousands of people, that have left and who are getting killed and who are getting maimed. So, huge error on their part. Huge error. I do think that it seems like they thought that the Ukrainians were going to let them in, and there may have been a little shiftiness on the Ukrainians' part of signaling that they weren't going to fight, and so the Russians came in thinking they were just going to have a coup de main, and instead they got their fucking face broken in. But yeah, that's one of the things. If you read the threat which I highly recommend. Look back at the video I did on the threat and read the book. They have to be very sanguine that they. I mean, there's a. Remember back in April, the Ukrainians, two Ukrainian helicopters flew to Belgorod and blew up like an oil refinery there. And on Russian state TV, somebody said, well, we can go to nuclear war with the United States because we'll just shoot all their missiles out of the sky. One of the commentators said, we can't even stop 2 Ukrainian helicopters from attacking Belgorod. And you think we're going to stop, 1,000 ICBMs from the United States? There's no way. Right, there's no way, and they know that. There's a great scene. That book opens with Andropov watching the May Day parade, and they're watching all the soldiers, and it looks impressive, right? They have great marching, great drill. They're snazzy uniforms, nice bands, but they're parade troops. They're parade troops. They have a special base just where they practice being parade troops. Right, and they know that, so they know this doesn't translate to actual like military prowess. They're aware of that. So, how do you react to a Christian fundamentalist that says the Russian-Ukraine war is another sign that we're at the end of times? Again, they say that all the time. What's your view on Ex-Omniverse now? I don't really have a view of him now. He doesn't make videos anymore. So I don't know what happened with him. He doesn't make enough content, so I have no idea. Who do you think will win the Super Bowl? Now, the Super Bowl is like the last round of the World Cup, because I think that's going to be the Tampa Bay Lightning. Is a really smart guy and is a good friend, but LP really got into his head. He's not the same dispassionately reasoned person anymore. Remember when Adam Kokesh had a show on Russia Today? That was really wild. Yeah, he also made a woman sign a slave contract. Yeah, I met Adam Kokesh a couple times at PorkFest, and that guy is, I don't know about now, but like, he's, you got to be careful with him. I think that Kokesh got a little bit of fame because of the the Veterans for Ron Paul or whatever, for speaking out against the Iraq War, which is good for him. All wonderful things, laudable things, and he just kind of parlayed that into celebrity, and it went to his head. And next thing you know, he's gonna call on a 10,000 armed march on DC and gets arrested for having a shotgun, which again, he shouldn't have been arrested for having a shotgun. People say now he's done mushrooms and he's better, but I don't know. He has his cult compound now, and no one likes him anymore. Yeah, I think he. Gonna vote. Yeah. He was trying to. Doesn't he live in New Mexico? He's from New Mexico originally. Yeah, he used to go to PorkFest a lot. It's been a couple years though. I watch a lot of your videos, and I don't think I've ever heard you comment about men going their own way or men's rights stuff. What are your thoughts about this? In one of my extremely few rare interviews, right? So there's a couple interviews with me out on YouTube, but very, very few. But I was interviewed kind of by, I want to say his name was Expaladoc. It was one of my subscribers who was an MGTOW. And I don't have strong feelings. People ask me about that a lot. And, that's for straight dudes, and I'm not straight. So, it's kind of like, how do we deal with women or whatever? And I'm not the right person to ask for advice on that, obviously. I will say, since I've grown my hair out, fucking girls love long hair. Oh my God, it's annoying. Oh, you have gorgeous hair. I'm like, bitch, shut up. Where's your brother? But because guys are more ambivalent about it. Men's rights, I kind of agree. If we're looking at divorce law and how it favors the women, I agree with all that, and I think it's wrong. And of course, I could very easily construe the whole circumcision thing as a men's rights issue, because it kind of is. And of course, I feel very strongly about that. I mean, obviously, you should be free to do whatever you want, and if you don't want to get married and you just want to either be an incel or just not get married, but have non-marital relationships, I mean, you should be free to do that. I do think, though, there's something to be said for having a commitment and having a family, and I think that long term, that's probably the way to go if you can make it happen. Now, maybe that's difficult, given the way things are now. Right, that the society and even the legal system is kind of stacked against men in that way. But, well, I think that you have biological advantages that you can probably leverage against that. You can find a way to make it work. Find a woman who you can psychologically manipulate to do what you want, and you'll be fine. I forgot that you're gay. Yeah, I'm gay. Jesus. Is long hair considered masculine today? No idea. I've just never had it long, so I'm growing it long to see what it's like. Adam's cult compound. So how many people were we talking, Jim? Are we like, there's like 1,000 of them, 10 of them, 5, 6? Like, he definitely has charisma. And he definitely is quick-witted, and you could see him manipulating people, for sure. He's a great salesman. Well, maybe not great if you can pick it up, as if I could pick up on it, but like, yeah. I'm curious. Do you think libertarianism will become popular again? Well, I don't know if it ever was. Anecdotally, it seems like among dissident voices, they've gone pretty heavily national conservative as a result of the mass bans. I don't know that libertarianism was ever popular. It seems weird. One thing I've noticed, that both the left and the right will draw on libertarian arguments. Like when the right is debating the left, all their best arguments, their best ammo, are libertarian arguments. And then they just never, but they're not principled when it comes to that. By and large, there are exceptions. Ron Paul is an exception. Thomas Massey is an exception. Justin Amash is an exception. But these other guys, they'll draw out all these amazing libertarian arguments, and then they'll only use them against the left and never against themselves. And even the left, when the left starts debating abortion now, they'll use the evictionist argument. I could not believe when I started hearing left-wingers use the evictionist argument, which I don't find a persuasive argument, but that's a Walter Block. That's like a libertarian argument when it comes to that. So I don't know. They like using libertarian arguments because libertarian arguments have been honed and tend to be sharper, better, stronger arguments, but they just don't use them consistently, and they're not principled. I don't know. There's a lot of turnover. Yeah. Doesn't make a man gay if he's attracted to a trans woman. Are you talking MTF or FTM? I mean, I have been attracted to and hooked up with people I thought were boys who ended up being girls who were trans, or how to say that, FTM, female to male, right? And I don't feel like that made me straight, so I don't think that makes you gay. No. Every Jackfest, there's a bunch of people who go around warning other people not to go to Adam's cult compound, and they use Jackfest as a reason to leave. Like warning because something coercive will happen, or just because they'll get brainwashed, or what? I mean, I don't know. He was never that. It's funny, crazy that he had a show on RT. Before that, he was on a radio station in New Mexico called Kiva, whatever. What was the decade of good movies? What was the decade of good movies for you? I don't know. I'd have to look. Since some left-wingers are now using evictionist arguments, do you think mainstream Democratic politicians will start using evictionist arguments as well? Yeah, what's fascinating, too, is the whole COVID thing kind of broke the pro-choice movement in a lot of ways, because their biggest thing was her body, her choice, her body, her choice, her body, her choice, which never made intellectual sense, because the whole point is that the fetus is not part of her body, and so it's not that strict of an easy thing. But then the whole point with the COVID vaccine mandates, to the extent that they existed, was that it is your body, but you don't have a choice. And I think that literally broke. And now, just coincidentally, the Supreme Court basically overturned Roe v. Wade. I don't think for that reason, but it's kind of been like a 1-2 punch. Apparently the trends have been pro-life has been getting more popular with time, and some people, it's the Freakonomics explanation that the pro-choice people are killing their babies, so they're not reproducing, the pro-life people aren't. I'll say even within the libertarian movement, way back like 2010, 2011, libertarians were pro-choice. Like, that was just one of the lists. Libertarians are pro-gun, libertarians are anti-tax, libertarians are pro-free speech, and libertarians are pro-choice. And I don't think I've ever read in Rothbard, I don't think Mises talked about it, but none of them seemed to be pro-life. But it seemed obvious to me that they should have been. And I have to sneeze really bad, so that's going to happen at some point. Pro-choice, anti-circumcision. Is that your position, Lockout Days, or is that some hypothetical person's? Yeah, but that's also a weird one, too. There are quite a few anti-circumcision people who are pro-choice, and that doesn't make sense to me either. Like, those seem like the principles involved are mutually exclusive. Chris Cantwell is in federal prison. What did he get, like accessory to murder? Do you like the movie Apocalypse Now? I've only seen it once, and I can't say that I enjoyed it. I wonder if Adam still has a chunk of human skull he took back from Iraq as a souvenir. He also took a gun back. They say he manipulates them to overwork them. Yeah, I mean, look, my whole foray into hypnosis, which is ongoing, has convinced me that it is just part of human nature, that a large segment, in fact, depending on how you do it, a majority of the population can be made to do things they don't want to do. It's just a fact. Chris Cantwell got me into O and A. Do you still buy books? Of course. I mean, Chris is just an ugly person, and that's just sad. People who are ugly, it's just not fair, right? Socialists say they're going to have equality, whatever, and it's just not true. Even if you made everyone have the same wealth or the same income, some people are just ugly, and they will be tortured souls forever, even if they're given more money. And some people are just beautiful, and even if they're have no money, they'll still have a relatively good life. It's just not fair. Nature is not fair. Sorry. Socialism, checkmate. Do you agree with people who say that the overturning of Roe versus Wade hurt the GOP in the 2020 midterms? No, I don't think so. Could be, but I don't think so. I think the GOP hurt itself. I think the GOP is a joke. The GOP doesn't stand for anything. They're becoming like the Conservative Party in the UK, which is just a really big tent with not really any principles. Are there principled people in the GOP? Yes, there are a few. Most of them have bad principles, though. Obviously, some of the Liberty Republicans are great, but there's a whole bunch of others who have principles that are neocon principles that are awful. But most of them are not principled at all. And I don't see why anyone could ever be enthusiastic. You don't really get anything. It seems like it's actually been a good thing that the Republicans got just barely a majority, because McCarthy is now giving things to voting blocks, including the Liberty Republicans are actually getting some things. I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make, but like, they're actually getting some stuff. And this is, if you watch a lot of Jimmy Dore, he's pointed this out, that like the constituent, like the squad, like the left-wing progressive Democrats never leveraged their votes to get anything. And yet Thomas Massie will. Well, because Thomas Massie is actually principled. Thomas Massie really believes what he says, and he will use what little power he has as a congressman to get that, whereas Ilhan Omar and AOC will not, because they're just complete whores. Chris is in prison due to Charlottesville. What about Charlottesville? He didn't hit somebody with his car, so what would be... He should have Austin Peterson. What's your favorite book on the Reconstruction period? So I have a shelf dedicated to that, but I haven't read enough of them to say. But Reconstruction, I'm still in the, I want to read more about the antebellum period. But Reconstruction is really, really important. But I do think that the Civil War destroyed the Union, that we don't have a Union anymore. The Union ended. The Revolution of 1776 is over. Like it ended with the Civil War. We don't have a union. We have a unified central state that looks like it's a confederation of federal states, but it's not. Are you surprised that Trump seems to have losing his stranglehold over the GOP? Nope, because most GOP people always hated Trump, and it was only because of their sycophantic desire for power that they kowtowed to him when they did. But they always hated him, almost to a man. And now that he's been discredited and defeated and impeached twice and whatever, I think enough of them are going to break ranks. There might be some who, for savvy reasons, think maybe he's the best horse to back. But other than that, I think there's very little in the institutional GOP. Now, are there GOP voters who still love Trump? Yeah, there are. Have you read anything on the War of 1812? Yes, I have. Stupid war. It was declared after the casus belli was already over. And huge mistake. Huge mistake. Stupid war. Fortunately, not that many people died. During the antebellum South period, states started taking Christianity more seriously because of the Great Awakening. On September 28, 2020, Cantwell was found guilty of a felony count of transmitting extortionate communications and one felony count of threatening to injure property or reputation. So did he get life in prison? Again, I'm not a big Cantwell fan, but that just seems silly to me. He should not have been charged with anything. Like, he should have just been mocked into into nothing. I mean, Charlottesville is such a non-thing. It's such an overblown thing. All right. Cantwell is released. And he even lived in New Hampshire for a while. He lived in Keene for a bit. So he's one of those other guys who became like a race realist. That's the other weird thing is the race realists are like IQ this, IQ that, IQ this, IQ that, blacks, blah, 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 IQ 80, whites, IQ. Yeah, but they all know Jews have higher IQs than whites. So do they think Jews are superior to whites? No. Right? So, do you believe Churchill is responsible for the Bengali famine? So if you'd asked me that 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said yes. Now I'm not as sure. Churchill's an interesting figure. There's a lot about him to not like. I just recently read a couple books on the Boer War, and gosh, that guy, not only was he in the Boer War and had a role in it, he was actually involved in earlier wars. He was at the Battle of Omdurman, which was in Sudan in 1887 or whatever. So this guy had quite the storied career. I will say of the World War II leaders, he seems to be the only one who had any kind of conscience when it came to the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, FDR was just a huge cuck for Stalin. The stuff FDR did for and with for the benefit of the Soviet Union was straight up treason. One of the other reasons to hate him. And Churchill was one of the few who seemed to recognize that at the time. But that does not make him okay or great in everything else that he did. Did you ever see the video of Cantwell crying? I did. The libertarian to white nationalist pipeline is a real thing. I wonder why. Well, most libertarians are white, so that's probably part of it. So Churchill was like Theodore Roosevelt in a way. I don't know how. I'd have to think about that more. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt, though, was also crazy. Like, he had a death wish. They both were smart. Churchill was but I mean, Churchill wanted to be a politician his whole life. But they were both war heroes. Churchill was in multiple different wars. Kind of spanned. I mean, he was in wars, colonial wars in Sudan and in South Africa and in India. And then he also was the Secretary of the Navy, or Secretary of the Navy. What is it called? What is it called in the UK? First Admiralty of the Navy in World War I and at the start of World War II. He actually led disastrous campaigns in both of those. So in World War I, he was the kind of the main guy behind Gallipoli disaster, and then later in World War II, behind the disastrous attempted naval engagement in Norway in 1940 in April, but somehow came through it, considered a hero. Theodore Roosevelt directly fought in battles in the Spanish-American War, which is, I thought Churchill was responsible for food blockade in Germany. Well, in World War I and World War II, Germany was blockaded, and he was the first Lord of the Admiralty at the start of both of those wars. So, yeah. All right, guys. It's been like an hour and a half. Any final comments? It's getting late here, and, it's like, let me click, what's the temperature right now? Let me check. Oh, I mean, it's 12, so, it's basically like summer. I had a few of them trying to convince me. Convince you of what? Did you read Malice's anarchist book? No, I didn't. Any recommendation for reading on the famine in Germany or in Bengal? And the answer to both is I don't know. No one brought up the balloon. Thanks, Lockout Days. Have a good night. Nice seeing you here. No one brought up the balloon, and the balloon is no longer up. It has been shot down. Nice to see you looking healthy and stuff. Yeah, you can hear me sniffling, right? Been in any serious relationships? Not really, although it depends how you define serious. Am I going to go hiking tomorrow? Yeah, I think I'll do Mount Washington, and I was going to wear flip-flops. Maybe a tank top. I mean, there are people who do it in the winter, but I think that's suicide. Just pull up the videos of Mount Washington from yesterday. It looks like Mars. I don't know how people live up there. I work outside, so I'd rather be in hot Florida versus freezing cold New Hampshire. Come to PorkFest in June. Just go to PorkFest and then make a decision. Have I been hiking by myself? Yes. No. In general, it's prudent to hike with other people, especially if they're longer hikes. But sometimes I have no one to go with, and it's a time I want to go. So the longest that I've done on my own was Mount Adams, and that was a lot of fun. That was a great hike, but the alt-right guys were trying to recruit me. You know one of them. A new ANCAP I thought of was Ryan Turnipseed of the Radical Liberation at YouTube. Don't know him. I don't think his mic was working, in case you were wondering who. No, I don't get the reference. Sorry. When I went to New Hampshire in June, it snowed once. Yeah, on top of Mount Washington. Do you think there's base people in Florida too? I'm sure that there are. There might even be more than there are in New Hampshire, but it's a question of their relative concentration. So yeah, there could be quite a few. I know there are. I mean, one of my favorite open carry YouTube channels is a guy in Florida, but they're outnumbered. Sometimes your shoes literally fall apart. Yeah, that literally happened to me before. I was hiking and my boots literally fell apart, but I wasn't alone. Broken microphone. No. What is that? Why does that sound so familiar? Broken microphone. Oh. Is he from Bulgaria? You won't go back to ParkFest, but it was an experience. It also changes from year to year, too. I think the tenor of what it's like has not been the same, and it's kind of shifted. That was his name. Yeah. Oh, gosh. That guy fell so hard. Such a weird white nationalist, too, because he's not white. He's like half Turkish. I mean, well, I don't know if he's around. I won't speak of him. Yeah, no, I know exactly who you mean, though. Yeah, my old Boy Scout boots did that to me once, one after another. Yeah, that literally happened to me. I had a pair of Boy Scout hiking boots that I had for 15 or 20 years, and I was hiking Mount Hancock with actually two subscribers, two guys who lived in the area who were subscribers of mine, and one of their girls they were trying to date. And they both fell apart literally at the same time. Both shoes, they literally fell apart within 20 steps of each other. Super awkward. Not a good look. Jim, how do you know a broken microphone? I mean, that's weird when people, like the whole, I don't believe in collectivism like that. I think it's kind of dumb, and that's kind of an illustrative point when you have somebody who's like, I don't believe that as an American I have the collective achievements of America in my veins or whatever. That just doesn't make sense to me. But if you believe in that and yet you're from, you're Bulgarian, I'm like, what are the great achievements you're drawing on? Yeah, he used to talk to me a lot more. In fact, I actually remember I was like at an airport, and he even messaged me to say that he was like, he thought that he was becoming an alt-right person, and he wanted me to like intervene, and I was just too busy. But I don't know why he found it so compelling. I can't find Junior Bacon Cheese's channel. He probably deleted it. A lot of these guys, they moved on and they just went back and they deleted everything, or YouTube got rid of them, or they hid that, they shadow banned the stuff so it's not there anymore. They did a lot of weird things. They got rid of the video replies for some reason. They said, well, it didn't generate a lot of views. Like, who cares? There's lots of channels out there that have no views. They don't stop you from uploading. I don't get a ton of views. They never stop me from uploading except for the Holocaust denial videos. Those get taken down. Other than that, yeah, Junior Bacon Cheese was great. Spock Talk. Yeah, I remember Spock Talk. And Spheron. And Napalm Tube. And they all started coming back. Like, there's a whole bunch. Remember Stefan was this German guy, and he made really good videos for like a year or two, and I mean there were tons of them. You even had like one-hit wonders who'd make 1 or 2 videos, and that would be it, you know? And yeah, they just all move on. Seems to be like a certain like age demographic that does it. You know, there's certain types, you know, usually men. Brain Police 2, there was some drama there with him. Market Libertarian was one. Austro Libertarian was another one. Talk about overall time of attention on your video as compared to overall time and attention on a college professor over the course of a career. Aaron and 00855. Well, so hung like a tic tac. It depends. So your average college professor, your average college professor, they don't get as many views or as much attention as I do. Not even close. But then you have college professors who are famous and like they obviously get far more. I mean, you could look at somebody like Jordan Peterson as a college professor, you know, right? And like he's got an enormous footprint that wouldn't even make sense to compare the two. But you know, your average professor or your average teacher in high school, I don't think it's even close. Death and Taxes. Why does that sound familiar? I mean, and there were even a bunch of like conservative ones. How the World Works, you know, was one who made a lot of videos for a while. I can't even remember his name. There was another guy. He was really cute, conservative, you know, and he'd make videos for a while, and they were gone. What are your thoughts on Harry Brown? I think Harry Brown's great, and I wish that he died prematurely, way before his time. He's very articulate, wrote good articles. He's a hero for what he wrote after 9/11. And he was on, like, he had a radio show or whatever, and you can find the videos, or at least you could. And they're great. Obviously super well read. He kind of, I guess he had made it investment wise and kind of didn't really have to work. And yet he lived in Switzerland for a while and came back. And I think he's fantastic. And it's a sad shame that he just suddenly died way before his time. The Conversational Atheist. I don't wish he died prematurely. I say that he did, and it's a shame. He shouldn't have. Because he was contributed a lot. He was a really smart guy, and his input and his ideas were, you know, worth putting out there. So, who else was there? Max Stirner. Trying to think who else. I mean, there was a guy, he called himself Austro-Libertarian. He had a really strong Southern accent, and he was in law school, and I think as soon as he graduated, he was done. There was another one called Ryan Safner. I liked a lot of his videos, but, you know, he became a professor and deleted his YouTube channel. There was Tumbleweed Joe. He had a kid. You know, he's like, I have a kid, and I'm going to focus on that now, and he did. And he made a video 11 years later. How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. Have a good night, Quentin. Come to Porkfest. Yeah. Who else? There's so many, and I think they're all got deleted. It would be crazy to go and see if any of those videos were still up there someplace. I'm sure some of them are, but a lot of it just got deleted. You know, and that's also interesting too. When they delete it, is it because they're repudiating what they thought, or they're just moving on with their life and they don't want the videos floating around? You know, it's probably a bit of both. All right, guys. Well, it's been great chatting with you all, but I think it is time to call it a night.